Is it a good morning? Are we glad? Are we glad that we're here? Hey, you know how you have those things in life where it's one of those things that it's a process that you have to go through, and you're waiting to get to some big day, and it seems like there's tons of steps, or maybe there's just a lot of time. Or some of you, anybody actually already done any Christmas shopping? Anyone there yet? Please, seriously, yeah, that's impressive. We've got a man in the room who's already doing Christmas shopping. That's awesome. And I mean that in the biggest way possible. I kind of one of those, I'm hoping for the, Christmas Eve sales by the time I get around to getting the Christmas gift. That's huge. But we have these moments where maybe it's a gift we have for someone, and then we have to wait months to give it to them. Or a guy is dating a girl and he wants to ask her to marry him, and he has to wait for this moment. And then the moment comes, and there's this huge, hopefully, joy expressed from the one who gets it, and at least relief on your part, right? Or maybe even, when you guys are building up the time and the courage to ask a lady out, you've thought about all the 27,000 scenarios that can happen when you finally get around to asking her out. And ladies, you thought this went away in middle school? Nope. We got some men in the room, but it finally comes time for them to ask you out. And there's so much pressure that once they get the question out, there's such relief, they don't even care if you say no. Okay? Just try that, girls, next time. Even if you want to go, just say no the first time. If he looks relieved, say, I was just kidding. And then maybe that'll add even more pressure. Well, today is one of these days, hopefully of great joy for you, and certainly great relief for our staff team, because we have been planning towards, praying towards, working towards, really had September 23rd circled on our calendar for a few reasons. We're launching our Tell Me Who I Am series this morning that we've been building up for. And let me just tell you how we've been doing that. Really back in April or May, this series we felt like God was leading us as a church to go through this series this fall for Epic here. And so I'm glad you're here for that. And I'll tell you kind of what that's about in a moment. And so we've been waiting for and planning towards, for the first time ever, if you join a small group, we've actually written the book for you. And so it's a great way to just be with other people. You'll get your own book. At least go week 1, get the free book, sell it on eBay, make a buck or two off of us, okay? But it's a great way. So even if you miss, you can catch up with a video podcast when you're out. Many people travel. And in fact, I think everyone in our church travels at least 2 or 3, 4 times a month. And so you can keep up by the website, but then you can actually also have a book with you. Even if you're apart from your small group, you can see all the questions. They've already been written. We had a great designer design the logo for this. The same guy did the video. And then Tim went all crafty on me. You guys know the pastor's got no craft. But Tim went all crafty, kind of made the Tell Me Who I Am. And he really likes it when the lights are off because the colors change. And you'll see that again before you leave. In fact, when Tim got it up on Monday or Tuesday it was, he just kind of sat there and watched it for about 2 hours. Just as it changed color. It was a huge accomplishment. And so we did that. And what Brad didn't tell you guys as he introduced the Tell Me Who I Am song is that because of us having the planning for the series, Brad came, I don't know if it was one day in June or June, I think July sounds right, maybe even early August, and said, hey man, I've got a song for this series. And I was like, that's great. Who's it by? And he's like, I've just written it. And so Brad's written a few songs. We're going to try to get this one recorded, Brad. So anybody wants to pay for the studio time, we're going to make this thing happen. But I hope that song even becomes an anthem for us during this fall. And so our team has really worked hard. And when I say that, I don't mostly include myself. I've got God has put a ton of leaders around me with a great vision and ways to carry this out. And so we have invested a lot. And now I'm just going to, even if this is terrible this morning, tell us that it's great, okay? And then write us an email tomorrow, because we just don't need to be let down today. We've been working really hard for the Tell Me Who I Am series. So if you guys are just like, Ben, that was the best thing ever, and then tomorrow tell us it was terrible, okay? And we'll receive that well. Well, here's the big idea behind why we're doing 9 weeks with this thing called Tell Me Who I Am. The big idea behind it is this. It'll be on the screen, but we all look to someone or something to tell us who we are, and then we live out of that identity. Every one of us in the room, you'll hear this definition of the series a lot, because I want to continue to remind us that every human being in this room, outside of this room, we all look to someone or something that defines us, that speaks identity into us, that gives us a portion or a piece of our own reality, and then we live out of that. And it's great when we're understanding that our reality is in the place it really is, but when our perspective is different, or if we're getting our identity, or if we're allowing things to define us that probably shouldn't be defining us, then things can go bad for every person in this room really quickly. And we've all been a part of lives where this has happened. So many things that you and I can look to tell us who we are, right? You can get on the weight scale in the morning and you're like, there's no way that's true. Anybody? You're like, that's got to be kilograms, right? There is no way that that's accurate depiction, right? And I know kilograms are actually smaller, but anybody else get on the scale like 10 or 12 times and you're just convinced? Or is that just me? Like, I'm just convinced it is going to go down if I just keep hopping on the scale, because that's one of the things that tells us who we are, right? My wedding ring, it tells hopefully me and you something about my relational status. Our paycheck or the lack of the money we have in our bank account can tell us who we are. There's lots of things people can tell us who we are, kind of where we rank within our organization or our team at a company we're part of, or whether we have a great job or whether we find ourselves unemployed. We can allow those things to tell us who we are. So there's so many things that we can see that can define reality for us. In fact, there's a bunch of things that you can't see that can tell us who you are too, right? We can't see your past, but certainly your past can define you. That's what we'll talk about next Sunday. You can't see someone's reputation, though you can see the effects of it, right? You can't see character. You can't see fears. You can't see insecurities. So there's so many things that you and I just deal with every single day, and it can actually change from day to day or even hour to hour what you and I allow to define us. And so this 9 weeks that we're launching into this morning is really going to be looking at big topics that I think many of us in this room can relate to, if not all of us, and saying, hey, what happens if that thing defines you? Like, what happens if your past defines you? Or what happens if your financial situation, good or bad, defines you? Or what happens if your relational status defines you? I mean, what is going to take place if we continue to let all of these things in our world define us? And while we're going to talk about in the future all the things that we see that can define us, what I want to do as we kick off this thing this morning is actually talk about how many of us in this room can be defined by what we don't have. Talk about how many of us in this room can actually be defined by what's missing. Living life kind of in this, I just don't have enough mentality. If I only had this, or if I only could do more of that, if I was only smarter, if I was only wealthier, all of these different things. And so what I want to do this morning is really cast this vision for, hey, is it possible that you're allowing what you don't have or what's lacking or what's missing to define you? I think there's a great story in the Bible, in the Gospel of Matthew. And so I'd love for you to turn there. If you need a Bible, just raise your hands. Keep them up high. Priscilla, Skip, Diana are going to take care of you guys. Just keep your hands up high. This is just a small token of our appreciation for you being here. We do teach from the Bible, and we'd love for you to have a copy of that, both for this morning, and you can take one of those with you. We'd love for you guys to have a copy of the Bible there. We'll start in Matthew chapter 14. It's the first book in the New Testament. If you just received one of those Bibles, we're on page 532 in that gift Bible, page 532. The rest of you, Matthew's the first book in the New Testament, so it's the first of the 4 Gospels we have in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew chapter 14, we'll start in just a moment in verse 13. You're going to see what I think is something really profound, this experience that Jesus has with his disciples and the experience that Jesus and his disciples have with a big crowd, probably somewhere in the range of 10 to 15,000 people. So a lot of people are going to observe what we're about to observe ourselves. And before you see what Jesus does in the story, though, I want you to see what Jesus is going to be feeling emotion-wise headed into the story. By way of his disciples, Jesus has just learned that John the Baptist, a real dear friend of his, has been beheaded. Okay? Anybody had their friend beheaded lately? That would cause an emotional. Anybody want to behead any of their friends? Well, Jesus has just found out that John the Baptist has been murdered. He has been beheaded. And the reason this is a big deal, let me just give you a few. When Mary, Jesus' mom, was first pregnant with Jesus, she went to her relative Elizabeth, who was already 6 months pregnant herself. And she was the one carrying John the Baptist. And Mary's carrying Jesus in her womb. And it says that John the Baptist, when even though Jesus was in the womb, it's kind of crazy, but the baby, John the Baptist, leapt within the womb of Elizabeth because of his response to Jesus being near. Crazy. And the reason why it's such a big deal is because God's purpose for John the Baptist's life is that he would be this forerunner or precursor to Jesus himself. He would be the one who comes onto the scene announcing, repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. He would be telling people, hey, the Messiah is coming. And the Jews, they would ask John the Baptist, hey, are you Elijah, or are you a prophet, or are you even the Messiah? And he said, oh no, I'm not the Messiah. I'm just announcing the coming of the Messiah. In fact, I'm not even worthy to untie the sandals of the Messiah who's coming. And so Jesus burst onto the scene, right? And Jesus is about to begin his public ministry. And it's time for Jesus to be baptized. Now, every person that I get to baptize here at Epic is a huge privilege for me, but baptizing Jesus might rank a little bit up. No, okay, it'd be even with the rest of you. And Jesus is going to be baptized, and he insists that John the Baptist be the one to baptize him. Kind of crazy, right? Like, and John the Baptist kind of says this, like, you don't need me to baptize you. This is backwards. And Jesus says, no, this is what's right. And so they have this beautiful friendship, this great relationship, great connection since even being in the womb. And he's just found out that his friend John the Baptist, the disciples tell him he's just been killed, he's been murdered, he's been beheaded. And so you can imagine the emotional weight that you would feel if you just gotten word that your friend had been murdered, not died of natural causes, he had been murdered. in a really cruel way. And so Jesus is feeling that as we enter into the story. Would you all stand with me? Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 13. And what Jesus is going to do, you'll see it in the first part of the text. What Jesus is going to do, he's going to withdraw to a place of solitude to be alone, right? Many of us, other than maybe being around people that are really close to us, he wants this time to reflect. He wants this time of solitude. But because the crowd's kind of pressing in on him, he's not going to be alone for long. Matthew 14, 13 through 21. Now when Jesus heard this, and again, just remember what he's just heard is John the Baptist has been murdered. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." And then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. You may be seated. So remember, Jesus is having this powerful, emotionally charged moment. He just wants to get away. He just wants to remove himself from people. He wants to go to a desolate place. That's why he's going to what they describe even in a moment as that being a desolate place. He's trying to withdraw. He wants to get away, and the crowds press in on him. And here's what's blowing my mind right off the bat that you see even starting in verse 14. You would think the one person who needs sympathy in this moment is Jesus. You would think the one person who needs to have compassion exhibited towards him would be Jesus. His best friend has just literally been killed. And it says in verse 14 about Jesus, Jesus looked at the crowds, maybe 10 to 15,000. It says 5,000 men plus the women and children. He looked at the crowds and he had compassion on them and began to heal their sick. Like the one guy who should have mercy shown to him, who people should be like, hey, now he's just gone through this huge loss, which is absolutely true. He wants to be alone. Jesus, not only is he not annoyed that the crowds, it's one thing to want to be alone and have a few people come press in on you, right? It's another thing to want to be alone and all of a sudden there's 10,000 people after you, right? I mean, it's kind of like just hanging out in downtown, but you want to be alone. You can't find anywhere to go cry, if you know what I'm saying. Not that I'm a crier. I'm just saying if you had that going on and you wanted a place to cry. And so the crowds press in on him. And in my mind, it would have seemed so natural for him to say, not right now. Like, I can't do this right now, right? It would be very natural. And you couldn't blame the man for doing so. But instead, not only does he not beg for their compassion, it says that he sees them and he has this amazing amount of compassion. And he, the one who probably needs his own soul kind of made whole in this sad, emotionally charged moment, he begins to heal their sick. I mean, it's hard to come up with an excuse, right? Like when I get home and my kids start jumping on me, I want to be like, I've worked 8 or 9 or 10 hours today. And Jesus has just lost someone very near and dear to him, and yet he has compassion, and he begins to heal their sick. And the disciples, let's don't hate on the disciples, okay? They're just using the only math skills they had, right? I mean, what would you do? You've got 5 loaves of bread, you've got 2 fish, there's 10,000 people. I mean, even if we had 5 loaves and 2 fish, most of us are leaving this place hungry this morning, true? Let's don't hate on the disciples. It's not like they're using great logic. They're using great reason. They're not the smartest kids at this school, but they use what they know to be obvious. And they're just like, Jesus, this is a desolate place. The day is over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food. And Jesus says they need not go away. You give them something to eat. Now, I know in a crowd this size, and especially those of us who live here, some of you have, remember, they're in a desolate place. There's no restaurants around. Some of you have made great commitments long ago to never eat again at McDonald's, right? Some of you have made that commitments. But you find yourself, especially if you go on one of these off-road, like road trips in small towns, and you're looking at the GPS, what are all the food options? You're just starting to get hungry. I mean, all the granola bars you brought with you, they're gone. There's nothing really in sight to eat. Everything's gone, and you see on your GPS, if it's still working when you're out there on those roads, that for the next 73 miles, a McDonald's is all there is. You've got a choice to make, right? Now be honest, how many of you are going to, no matter what commitment and promise and pinky swears you did, are actually going to stop and eat at McDonald's if it's the only thing for 73 miles? Come on. Come on. The rest of you, I need to know your secret. Basically what the disciples are telling Jesus, there's not even a McDonald's around here. I mean, there aren't even enough Big Macs if you can get to them to feed 10,000 people. You've got to send them home. They're going to starve to death. They've got nothing to eat. They've been here all day. The text tells us it's evening, and Jesus says to them, you guys go feed them. To which they respond like we would respond in verse 17, right? They say, we only have 5 loaves and 2 fish. While many of us aren't missing out on food and things, basic things like shelter, perhaps. Some of us may be in our church this morning. Many of us are allowing our lives to be defined by what we don't have. And that's what the disciples say. They say, we have only blank, right? Or we start a lot of our sentences, or we think statements, or we even make statements that I only have, and then fill in the blank, right? Because we feel like we don't have enough money, we don't have enough intelligence, we don't have enough clout with the boss like so-and-so down the hall does, we don't have enough experience, we don't have whatever it may be, and we allow ourselves to actually be defined by what we don't have. And the problem with the disciples is not that their math was bad, their math was exactly right. 10,000 people, 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish, yep, it doesn't work out. And the only problem is that Jesus, who speaks with great authority, has told them to feed the people. Right? It's quite a dilemma there. Yes, their math is correct according to how we naturally think about math terms, and there's obviously not enough. Their math is correct, but what they're missing out on is that Jesus has told them to do this. Right? Jesus is saying, listen, I want you to feed them, and they're going, listen, we've only got. But that's how many of us live our lives. Right? We want to dream big dreams for our life. We want to become the people. We want to be defined by so many things, but then we look and we go, you know what? There's just too much missing. I don't have enough experience to be whatever. I don't have enough confidence to be this. I don't have my past is too whatever. And so I don't have a good past. That's missing. I don't have the kind of reputation I need to have. I don't have the kind of experience I need to have. And many of us in this room allow our lives to actually be defined, not by all the things that we have. We'll talk about that the next 8 weeks. But many of us in this room allow our lives to actually be defined by what we don't possess, what we don't have, what we don't have experience with, by what's lacking or by what's missing. And that can happen in a lot of ways. And it can be good things we're missing, that or even good desires. We'll talk about that in a moment. But we allow ourselves to be defined. And when our lives are defined by what's missing, things can get out of alignment for us really quick. When your life is defined by what's missing, right? Things can get out of balance or out of alignment for us really, really quickly. And what I'm not saying this morning, what I'm not saying is that if you and I, like Brad saying earlier, if we allow Jesus to speak a new reality into us, what I'm not saying is that there won't be some things missing in your life. In fact, I believe as long as you and I are alive, there will always be some things missing from our lives. And I'm also not saying that those aren't healthy desires. I think a lot of the things that you're missing this morning that you want to be true, I think those are great desires. And I think we need to pray to God and we need to express our desires. And God, this is not true right now. God, I want this to be true. Now, the Bible also says that there are evil desires that wage war against the new soul that God's creating in us. And so we need to be careful with those. We need to probably confess those to God, ask for His help to get rid of those things in our lives. But there are lots of good desires and healthy desires that some of you have this morning, and they're not happening yet. And what I want to say to you is 2 things, maybe different things, but they go together. One is express those desires to God, and there's nothing wrong with those desires. Number 2, don't let yourselves be defined by those desires. Don't let yourselves be defined by what's missing. Some of you in this room, you want to be married, and for whatever reason, probably just your high standards, this is not happening yet, right? Some of you long for this. Some of you are like, no, not me, Ben. But some of you in this room, you long to be married, and you're going, is this going to happen? Listen, I want it to happen for you if that's something you want. I'd love for it to happen here at Epic if you're a girl, I hope it happens with a man here at Epic. If you're a guy, I hope it happens with a girl. And it's not just because the pastor gets 3% kickback on all the couples that make it long term. But I would love for that to happen, but it's just not happening right now. Right? Some of you want to move up the chain. You want to move up the ladder in your organization or your company or your industry. Maybe you even want to go to the top. And in your track plan, you should be there right now, and you're not. Some of you moved to San Francisco to start your own thing, right? You heard it was the place for all the dreamers to come. There's no other reason to pay $2,000 per square foot for rent if it's not the place, right? That's what you're doing here. You came here because you heard that Silicon Valley, in the Bay Area, and San Francisco in particular, you heard that that's the place to come. That's where all the VCs are. That's where dreams get launched. That's where businesses get started. That's what you're here to do. And you had this huge full color, like 6 or 8 color plan, and it looked beautiful. The problem is you were supposed to launch that thing in 2010, and it's 2012, and it's not launched yet. Right? We have women in our church who long to have children. And I wish I could explain to them, here's why, but I don't know. And so we're just praying for them. Some of them on a consistent basis. God, would you give these ladies kids? There are some things that you don't have that you should want. There are desires that haven't been met yet that you should continue to express to God. The problem is, if you let yourself be defined by what's missing, there will always be something missing. Always. I'll tell you just a few of my desires that haven't happened yet. When somebody asks me right now, Ben, how's life for you guys out in San Francisco, especially if they're living in another city? I would tell them our life is as good as it's been, and I really mean that. Things at church are going well. I feel like in the 12 years Shauna and I have been married, our marriage is as strong as ever. Our kids are doing really well in school, and on and on and on. But there's still some things missing. I'll just tell you that 3 of the things that are missing. Some of you know we're in the adoption process right now, and we're adopting from the country of India. And India has all of our paperwork, but that adoption, I have no idea when it's going to go down. People are like, but when do they think time frame wise? Like, they don't know. This is a whole new thing, and we don't know. And so that's something that's missing. And until that gets finalized and she and I hop on a plane to fly back with our daughter, it's missing. Right? We're ready for her. But who knows? It's missing. I hope that our church is so influential in the city that over the next 10 years, we have to meet in more than just Soma. Have to have more campuses than more than just Soma. But right now, this is where our church is, right? Unless you guys have seen other locations that I should be informed about. Please let me know, especially if it's they're doing a better job than we are. I'd love to. Otherwise, we need to steal back our identity from them. But that's not happened yet, right? I have tons of dreams for our church, and lots of them have happened. We wanted to get a church launched in downtown. We want to see things grow. We're only 19 months in. Lots of things have happened, but there's still a long list of things that I'm dreaming for, that I'm desiring to see happen in our church's life. I don't know if this is a crazy desire or not, but I would love to own a home in San Francisco one day. If the trajectory continues, that's not going to happen for the next 2,000 years, but I would love to own a home in San Francisco one day. There's a lot of things in my own life that are missing that I think are even good desires. I really do. But if those things begin to define me, things will go bad for me really quickly. Let's talk about the adoption. Well, first of all, 2 reasons. It may take a long time, and so it could be missing for a while. We want it to happen. We're praying it'll happen soon, whatever. There's a lot of hoops and a lot of things that could happen. But even if the adoption goes through and we get that thing that's missing, that takes place, I still can't find my identity from our adopted daughter. I can't find it from my wife. I can't find it from my current children. Why? Because first of all, I can't put a weight on them. I can't find my sole purpose in life being their dad or her husband or your pastor. I can't do that. That stuff begins to go bad. If when it comes to the home thing, I may never own a home. No matter what my desire is, that may not happen. And even if it happens, okay, so that happened, there's still something missing if we don't live out of the identity that God's wanting to speak into our lives. And so what the disciples are doing, they're just going, I only have this. I only have 5 loaves. I only have 2 fish. And some of us in this room are going, but God, I only have this. When my kids begin to speak in those kinds of statements, Dad, we only have, or I don't get to do what my brothers get to do, Shauna and I begin to know right away that there's something off because they're focusing and they're allowing themselves to be defined by what they don't have. And so what we want to speak into them is, guys, you've been given so much. God's done this. But it doesn't just happen for children, does it? Wouldn't it be great if kids are the only one that struggled with, I don't have enough? We may not vocalize it like they do, but we struggle with the same thing. The question is, in this story, in verse 17, the disciples say, we only have this much food. Look at what Jesus says in verse 18, because we need to know, what's his response? When we say to Jesus, I only have, what does Jesus say to us? What he says to the disciples in verse 18 is profound for them, but really profound for us with this identity thing. He says, bring them here to me. They go, here's all I've got. It's not enough. And Jesus goes, bring it here to me, because what he's wanting to teach them and what he wants to teach us is, yes, you may be an incredible mathematician, but the way math works in God's economy is quite different than it works in ours. You're like, Ben, I'm a physicist. Awesome. But when God gets involved, what you see throughout history, and especially in the scriptures, when God gets involved, he tends to show up, and I even think show off in a good way, in the places where people seem to not have enough. He seems to be more than sufficient. right? Think about Moses. God calls Moses to lead about 2 million Israelites out of Egypt from their days of slavery into the promised land. He wants Moses. If you're going to get someone to lead 2 million people, you need a strong leader, right? You need someone with charisma. You need someone that's got great speaking skills. Moses stuttered. So when God says, Moses, it's time for you to do this, Moses says, I don't have enough. I don't have enough speech communication skills. I don't have enough leadership skills. I've not been experiencing this. And God says, you know what? When I get involved, I will be with you. I will go before you. I will be in the midst of this. I will be enough. When David, it comes time for this little boy to fight Goliath, he doesn't have any MMA experience, right? They're throwing armor on the kid that doesn't fit. But when God gets involved, the math changes. When Esther doesn't think she has enough clout with the king for the king to let her people go and be freed from, really, they were about to be annihilated. They were about to be murdered in mass. It was going to be just a crazy, crazy thing there. Her relative Mordecai says, hey, you might not think you have enough clout, but we're going to fast for you, and hopefully God's in this. Go to the king. You've got this one opportunity. And she goes, even though she didn't have enough clout with the king. When God gets involved, he begins to turn the hearts of people. Listen, when Jesus calls the disciples, one of the things we read in the scriptures about these men is that they were ordinary, unschooled men. Jesus called men who didn't have enough. I mean, they didn't have enough anything. They weren't smart. They knew how to fish. That's about it. They weren't smart. They didn't have great character. They didn't always wash their hands when they ate. I mean, he's just calling guys that really don't have it together, which is kind of encouraging to me. Anybody else? I'm kind of glad they screwed up a lot, just to be honest. And he's still loving them and still letting them be disciples. Kind of gives me hope. I don't know about you. So what God seems to do is he seems to show off in those moments when it seems very clear from the appearance of things that there isn't enough. Until he gets involved. What he's saying to them about the loaves and the fish is he's saying to us with our identity, he's going, hey, bring it here to me. I can do something with you. I'm more than enough. I've got something for you that you can't produce on your own. You don't have to be defined by what's missing, but the disciples were so clearly believing that it was impossible for them to accomplish what Jesus said he was going to accomplish. And some of you in this room, you hear things, if you've been around here, you hear things like, Jesus has come to earth to die for your sins, to make you new. And you go, I just don't know if that's possible. I just don't have enough knowledge. I don't have enough good performance, right? Ben, if you just knew, like even what I did last night, you would understand. I don't have enough. I don't have what it takes. And Jesus says to us the same thing. Bring it here to me. Bring it here to me. Let me see if I can do something that you can't do. And in verse 20, it tells us about this crowd. It says that they all ate and were satisfied. It doesn't say that Jesus did a small miracle and gave them just enough, like a morsel of bread and fish, just to whet their appetite. It says in the text there in verse 20, Matthew 14, verse 20, it says that they all ate and were satisfied. And oh, by the way, there were 12 baskets of leftovers. Like, Ben, I'm smarter than that. That can't happen. Well, it could if he gets involved. Listen, you think that's huge? We think that's a miracle? Absolutely it is. But a greater miracle than that is that when Jesus comes to earth, he comes to renew you. He comes to redefine you. How does he do it? Well, he comes because there's something missing. And what's missing is a relationship between humanity and God because of our sin and God's holiness. There's something broken there. And so when Jesus comes to earth, he comes to restore it. And he does so by dying on the cross, a death that my sin and your sin deserved. He lives this perfect life. And though he dies for our sin, out of his death, we get his righteousness. Resurrection happens 3 days later. He overcomes sin, no matter what the thing is that tends to define you. We'll be talking about past next week. He overcomes that. And what he does is wants to redefine who you are. And he wants to give you a stable place to find your identity. He wants to let you know that, hey, in Christ there isn't anything lacking. Hear this from 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. I'll just read this. You'll see it on the screen. Peter, who was one of those disciples that had all kinds of encounters with Jesus, says this about God. His divine power has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness through the knowledge of him who called us to his own glory and excellence, by which he has granted to us his precious and very great promises, so that through them you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped from the corruption that is in the world because of sinful desire. Just two things I want to point out from there. Peter, who messed up royally, who could have allowed a lot of things that were missing in his character and to define him and kind of shape who his identity and what his identity was going to be. He says to us, because of what Jesus has come to do, he's given us, his divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness. everything we need for life. That's a major promise. And then he says, because of the precious and great promises of God, that you and I can become partakers in the divine nature. And what he's saying is that Jesus has come to give us an alternate reality. Jesus has come to give us an alternate identity. And friends, you no longer have to be defined by what's missing. Now, some of you that are in a really good stretch of life right now, you'd say, Ben, what's the big deal? I'm pretty well. Things are going awesome relationally at the office. Finances are in good shape. I'm in the best health of my life. Ben, I don't have to be defined by what's missing because there's nothing really missing. All of those things that I just mentioned one day are going to go away. They are. You're like, no, Ben, I'm going to work till I'm 70. Okay, you'll turn 71 though, right? I mean, I'm going to be married forever. No, you will die or she will die, right? I mean, that's just going to happen. All of those things I just mentioned, they're going to go away. And so what I want to encourage you throughout this series beginning this morning to do is don't find your identity by something that can fade. Don't find your identity by what's missing. What Jesus wants you and I to do is go, bring it here to me is what he says to the disciples. They're like, we don't have enough. And he's like, bring it here. Because he can do something for us that we can't accomplish on our own. When it doesn't look like we have enough good behavior, right? When it looks like we don't have enough knowledge, when it looks like our past is too much for God to overcome, Jesus comes in and says, hey, I speak with authority, I speak with power, I speak with reality. I want to speak this new identity into you. The question for you this morning was the same for the disciples. Hey, will you allow Jesus to be what he wants to be? Will you allow him to do for you what he wants to do? You know, I say that God shows up when we seem to not have enough. My freshman year of college, quite a while now, my freshman year of college, I signed up for a basic public speaking course. And it was going to be like easy, like 30 or 40 students in the class. We could speak about anything we wanted to, and all we had to speak for were 5 minutes. That's it, right? I mean, I got this. Looking back, that's cake. But at the time, as a 18 or 19-year-old, I was so paralyzed and so terrified of giving this speech that the night before I was to give that first speech, and I knew it well. But I was so paralyzed by speaking in front of a group of 30 or 40 people that I dropped the class. And listen, if you think I'm bad now, you should have heard my rookie season doing this thing. Here's what I know. There'll never come a day, no matter how large our church gets, no matter how much influence, no matter how many places God gives me that I can go and speak and use this gift that he's given me, there'll never come a day, because I know what I didn't have enough of, there will never come a day where I go, man, I'm really an all-star at this, right? You know why? Well, A, because I probably won't be. But B, I wish I had that drop slip. It's a great story in my own life that, you know what, Ben, you didn't have enough. You couldn't even give a 5-minute speech. You couldn't even give a 5-minute speech about fielding a baseball. Something you knew, something that was ingrained in you, something you had practiced. Not only could you not give it, you were so terrified. I know that that's my reality. I know I didn't have enough, and God still did something when I was thinking it couldn't be done. As we got ready to start this church out here, people said, Ben, do you know the track record for people who've tried to start churches in downtown San Francisco over the last 35 years? I was like, no, I don't, and I'm not sure. I want you to tell me. Our staff, I have a great team, but we didn't have enough to bring this into existence. We needed God to get involved. We needed God to remake us. We needed God to do something. And what I'm hoping that you'll see out of this series is that God wants to give you a new identity. And he wants to start that, I think, in your heart and life this morning. And so I hope you'll be open to that. What I'm going to do now is just have a time where we're going to have some leaders, and Brad's going to come back just to play a little bit, to give you guys some time to respond. The last thing I want to do is go, hey, here's a bunch of things you've never thought about before, perhaps, and now I want you to leave. I want you just to have a reflection time. So would you guys just bow your heads, even if you're not a praying person, like just to reflect on what you've heard, kind of what's